Hi, Kristen. Welcome to Mom on the Verge.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you for being here and thank you for being patient with our technological issues at the start of this show. So hopefully we got that out of the way and now we're not going to have any more. So I would love you to introduce yourself to my guests and just talk a little bit about your history, what you do, how you came to do what you do, and because you are in the parent world, maybe talk about yourself a little bit as a parent. How many kids do you have? How old are they? All that stuff.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, thank you for having me. I am a parent empowerment coach and a school consultant. So I've been working with families for over 2 decades now. Before I was mom to, I have a 15-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, and a 9-year-old son. I was a Montessori educator. So I worked in Montessori schools for about 10 years. I was a children's house teacher, a preschool kindergarten teacher. I was then the director of the program. And then I was an assistant head of school at a large Montessori school up in Massachusetts. So as the assistant head, I kind of was like that disciplinarian. So I learned all about discipline, but all of that was before I was a parent. So I always say I wish I was like a fly on the wall with all this great advice I was giving parents. And I thought once I had my own kids, like, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm going to have
Oh,
perfect kids.
yeah.
And it was anything but, I
Right.
really was challenged in the very beginning, being a mom because I had those high expectations. And my daughter was very strong-willed. So I learned through her, I was trained in positive discipline. So I needed more tools. So I went to get them. And I loved positive discipline and how it blended with Montessori. So I always know when my middle daughter, for the past 12 years, I've been practicing positive discipline. So I'm trained to teach teachers and parents.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe give us a little, like, what is positive discipline exactly when you say that?
So positive disciplines based on the work of Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikurs. They're two Viennese psychologists. And Adler, people that still follow him, they call themselves Adlerians. And they believe that all human beings should be treated with dignity and respect. And so back in the early 1900s, this wasn't really happening as much in families. So it was new age then. And they also believed that children need to be taught, discipline is about teaching. It's not about punishment. So I help parents to see that how you can be kind and firm at the same time. Because kindness shows respect for the child, that dignity and respect, but the firmness shows respect for our child, ourselves. So I think sometimes people think of positive discipline as permissive, and it's anything but. We have a lot of boundaries, and it's clear and it's consistent because you're communicating that with your kids. A lot of communication skills is in positive discipline, like what to say instead of saying the negative, telling your children what to do, not what
Right.
not to do.
Right.
And it's teaching life skills and characteristics for good moral character.
Okay.
So Dr. Jane Nelson and Lynn Lott created an experiential teaching program probably about 40 years ago now, and they called it positive discipline. So it's taught in schools. I teach one-on-one parents, and I also go into schools and do big workshops. The workshops are really fun because it's experiential. So parents get to get in the role of the child, and they're like, okay, what's my child thinking and feeling and deciding when I'm yelling? What's happening? And that's really when we could see some positive change in not just our kids' behavior, but in the parents' behavior.
Okay. And does this apply to kids as young as like toddlers? Like, do you teach parents as young as toddlers all the way up through, I assume, adolescence?
I say toddlers to teenagers and beyond, it's never too late. But yes, as young as toddlers. However, those toddlers, I also talk a lot about the child development. And from birth to age 7, and you probably know this too, how formative those years are from birth to 7.
Yeah.
A lot of us adults are going to therapy right now because of things that happened from birth to 7, because you're in this unconscious, almost learning stage. So with those toddlers, sometimes it's more routine. It's a lot of the environment. So I do a little bit of Montessori in the home, helping parents set up their home environment to not be so stimulating. And how do we make it so that the child can become independent within their environment?
Mm-hmm.
So they become what they see and do within those first 7 years. So that's pretty formative.
Okay. Yes. I've always heard that. But I didn't actually learn that, or I don't remember learning it until both my kids were past 7. And then I was like, did I do what was right? Yeah. Because I will, say that in my own experience, I'm 45. So I was born in 1978. My parents were, I think, much more gentle than their parents, but not the way a lot of people parent these days. So there was a lot of go to your room. There was definitely yelling. There was occasional spankings. There was do what I say, not what I do. You're the child, I'm the parent. There was a lot. It was a lot of, that's how parenting was done back then.
That's called authoritarian parenting.
Correct. Yes.
That's very firm, but not so kind. You're not as democratic.
Definitely not as democratic. Yeah. And, the idea was like, I know better than you. I'm the adult. You're the child. I know better. I'm doing this for your best interest. You need to learn respect. You need to learn how to fall in line. You need to learn discipline, like all that kind of stuff. And when I became a parent, I thought I would be the same type of parent, because obviously that was what was modeled to me. And I was like, I'm fine. So here, and I'm sure a lot of parents say that. I turned out okay. Yeah. But then when I had my children and when I actually was the parent, I found that went against my instinct as a parent. And so I started doing things differently. Now, my husband was raised very similarly to me. And so this was a little bit of a challenge for us, and actually still remains a bit of a challenge, although I feel like over time he's definitely kind of converted over to my side. But where he wanted to continue doing what had been done in his childhood. And I was saying, instinctually, my gut is telling me that is not right. And so there was this little bit of a rift. So I'm going to assume that you see that in your line of work.
Definitely. Definitely. And that's where one of the things that I say is I help parenting partners to get on the same team. You're not going to necessarily be doing the exact same. I'm going to just move us a little bit. The background. So it's not that you have to do everything the same, but it's just getting on the same team of like, okay, one of the first things I do with parents is we create 2 lists. First, and that's in our workshops and in my one-on-one. And first, we just talk about all the problems and all the challenges and everything that's happening now. And usually when we do this with a group, the parents are all like, okay, it's happening to them too. And people just feel better about themselves. Like, not just me.
Yeah.
That's how I felt in the beginning. I was like, am I the only one that's being challenged by their 5-year-old? It's not just me. Children are the challenge. It's one of Rudolf Dreikers' books, Children, the Challenge. So we need to learn. And I love how your gut told you, you know what, this doesn't feel right. This is not right. And it's not that what our parents did was wrong. They did the best they could with what they knew. And like you said, they were probably more gentle than their parents. And I think that's huge to think about. And when we talk about reparenting our inner child, we have to sometimes give forgiveness and that kind of allowing like, hey, what happened. Going forward, this is what we know now with brain science. I love all Dr. Dan Siegel's book when he talks about the whole brain child. Like, children understand, they understand, they feel our emotions. They sometimes don't know what's happening. And that's why we sometimes have to be the fully functioning adult, and we have to change our behavior when it's not working, when it's not going to produce. And then, so the first we do all the challenges and the problems. The second list is I tell people to just like close your eyes and imagine, imagine your child at about the age of 30 years old, because that's what they're saying. The prefrontal cortex is finally done developing. It was 25, but now they're seeing in boys, it's really like 28, 29. So anywhere from 25 to 30. the prefrontal cortex is finally done developing, and that's where all those executive functioning skills live, and the response flexibility and the ability to see our own thoughts, you know, like all that happens later. So we need to just be aware of that, I think, knowing that
Well,
the
I'll
child's got a developing brain.
Yeah, and I'll stop you right there. For someone who doesn't have any background in this, can you talk about what executive functioning is and what was the second one you said? Reflex
Yeah,
something.
so a few of the things that, so your brain, and I'll do it here. I know some people can watch, some people can listen, but Dr. Dan Siegel does the brain in the palm of your hand. And so you have your brain here. And so from the palm down, that's like those automatic bodily functions. That's your brain stem, your heart rate, your breathing, everything's happening. Then if you put your thumb over here, that's the midbrain and the amygdala. And it's where the major radar lives, where you hear that freeze, fight, flight response lives in this midbrain. Also where our emotions and our memories are stored. So that's important to remember when we're doing this. And if you put your fingers down, the back is the cortex, and then and all the thinking happenings. But this front distal fingertips, your distal fingertips, that's the prefrontal cortex. That's not done developing until the age of 25. So it has response flexibility, emotional regulation, morality, judgment, the ability to empathize. Executive functioning is your memory. So, working memory is, it's a lot of the skills needed to be successful in life, you know. So what happens is sometimes our brain, you know, we're a little bit overtired, we're stressed out, things are happening, and our brain goes like this, like literally. And so the neuroscientists have discovered that this happens. We literally flip our lid when we're overly stressed or triggered is the word that people say. I got triggered by my kid's behavior, and then I had to yell. You know, no one's listening to me, so I just had to yell and I had to do this. Yeah. So when we're like this, what's showing is that freeze, fight, flight response. It's the emotions and memories. So sometimes people say, I never wanted to sound like my mom. And then here I am, all the things that you said, because I said so. That's why. You go to your room. That's why, because emotions and memories, that's what's coming out. You know, we flipped our lid. But what's happening is also our children have mirror neurons. So if we're like this and we're just like in that primal state, our child might be like that too. Yeah. And that's why sometimes when our child is like this and they're having a temper tantrum, it's really hard to stay calm and kind. You know, we flip our lid too because of those mirror neurons. Yeah. And we are the 45-year-old fully functioning adult. We might need to learn some new skills. And that's what I learned. I was like, wait a minute, I need some new tools to learn. I'm not reacting well to my child. She's not doing what I want her to do. And me pushing her to do it is not going to teach her. So how do I get her to cooperate? How do I get her on board too? And it's through communication, and it's through this idea too of people do better when they feel better. So that's a big part of positive discipline, is people do better when they feel better. So how do we help people to get into this powerful state, the brain that's fully functioning and working, not in this primal state?
Okay. That's great. That's great. I love that explanation. And someone else I was just talking to recently, she heard a similar explanation. It really helped her so much. She's like, wow, like I literally can't make a different decision when I'm in that triggered state. Like my brain is actually offline. Like the portion of my brain that would say, take a breath, slow down, you know, think about what you're going to say before it comes out of your mouth, is actually like disconnected. It's not plugged in. So I actually can't. So the key, I guess, would be preventing that from happening, right? Preventing that part of your brain from going offline by doing things beforehand when you're in a calm state. So how do you help parents do that? And after that, I want you to answer that question, but I have another question after that about young children, because I think this can be particularly difficult with young children because their language is not fully developed. They're, you know, communicating with them is just not as easy as maybe communicating with your teen. Now your teen still may not listen to you, but you know that they have like a comprehension of what you're trying to say to them. So I guess I have both of those questions.
And there's probably a few different things we could do. We could be proactive. So being proactive would look like having a morning routine. So I help my moms have this miracle mom morning. Like, what can we put in our morning routine to prime us so that we don't get triggered? So what would that look like? And we'll brainstorm that list. And it's going to be unique to everybody. I want everybody to create a routine that's going to work. Yeah. But if you could put some things on that list, like meditation, deep breathing, making sure just all the things that we need to be our best selves. Like, are we eating nutritious foods? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we having friendships and going out for coffee with, like,
yeah,
so many of these things we actually do need. It's not like oh, that would be nice if, no, it's necessary for our mental health. So, so what does a healthy, life look like? So morning routine type of things, setting up routines with our kids really helps. That's like one of the first things I help parents do is like, let's set up a morning routine and a nighttime routine. And you even like the child creates their own chart where they can create this routine of like, well, this is what we do.
Right.
A lot of time the parents will say, oh, they know what to do. I'm like, well, maybe they know what to do. And they're 7 years old. Like, don't you get a little distracted too? Like, give them as many ways to be successful.
Right.
So those are a few things you could do with the routines, with really taking care of yourself. But the self-awareness is the biggest piece too. So knowing that, okay, I know now that there's only 2 states of being, what we talked about before. We could either be in this powerful state of being where I know I can feel joy and happiness and love, or I can be in a primal state of being where I'm working through fear and I'm anger and jealousy. All this stuff is coming out. The trick is you can only be in one state of being or the other. You can't be in both at the same time. So I think just parents having that self-awareness of like, oh no, I'm triggered, I'm going here. Yeah. So I tell my kids this. I've taught my children this flipping of the lid. In classrooms, when I go to schools and I teach in schools, I tell the kids, I go, this is the lizard brain and this is the wizard brain. The wizard brain, you can think. The lizard brain, reptiles eat their young. Like, we are out to them. So knowing that, okay, I'm in the lizard brain right now. What do I need to do? So in the moment, parents are not always going to have this like positive discipline reaction. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to flip our lid. So knowing just the self-awareness of like, maybe I need to walk away. Maybe I need to take a positive timeout. Or realizing, okay, my child is like this. He or she's not going to hear a word I'm saying. Let me help him to feel better first, and then I'll fix, Connection before correction is another huge tool to just understand the child is never going to cooperate until you connect first, because the child is perceiving something. And that's another thing we talk a lot about are our perceptions. So not only is it the brain development, but they're perceiving something. And you have children, like if and when you raise your voice, the child is like, oh my God, you're so mad at me. Like, why are you yelling at me? And maybe you just raised your voice because you're like feeling flustered or whatever. Yeah. So the child perceives something, and then they usually perceive the worst case scenario, as we all do, that negative bias. So we need to be aware of that and then know that there's a belief behind the behavior.
So I think that brings up like some really important pieces I want to pull out of there, which is when you say, connection first and then correction second. A lot of times I think when our children are having a meltdown or not listening or not doing what we're being, we're asking them to do, there's this underlying assumption, I think, on the part of the parent that the child is just doing that on purpose. They're being bad. They are purposely not listening. They're purposely not doing what they're supposed to do. They're throwing a fit because they're just out of control and they want what they want. And they're not getting it. And so they're throwing a fit, which I have been guilty of, feeling all of those things and thinking all of those things. So how do you shift that? Because it is really hard when you ask your child to do something nicely. And I'm sure many parents have had this experience, right? You say, Johnny, we have to leave. Please put your shoes on. Johnny completely does not listen to you. Johnny keeps playing with Johnny's toys. Johnny, I told you the bus is coming. We have to get our shoes on. Please go get your shoes on. And then the child doesn't listen until you're like, Johnny. You know what I mean? So I mean, like, we've all had these experiences. So how do we shift our perception? And what do you see as going on in the child at that time? You know, other than just they don't feel like putting their shoes on because they would rather be playing, right?
So that's, I love this. So that's another thing that I help parents to become is the detective. We're going to become the detective of our child's misbehavior. So if you can think of like an iceberg. So we're looking at the iceberg. The misbehavior is just the tip of the iceberg, right? That's what we see. We see this misbehavior. But what we don't see is the belief behind the misbehavior. So Rudolf Dreikurs discovered this, and he saw, and we know now about these universal needs. There's these 6 universal needs. 2 of the ones that positive discipline looks at is this need for belonging and significance. So the child, all human beings have this need to feel belonging and significance, and to have this perception of belonging. I belong no matter what. Belonging can be thought of as unconditional love. I am loved no matter what. I belong in this family. Significance is like personal power. I have power over my environment. That's where that, like, it doesn't work anymore, that the parent's like, because I said so. The child's like, give me some power, give me some choice. Freedom within responsibility. So that's belonging and significance. When the child doesn't perceive belonging and significance for some reason, maybe we yelled, maybe they see you hanging out with the baby more, maybe the teenager feels like you're letting that all my kids think I have a favorite and the other one's the favorite, not them.
Right.
So, like, you have a favorite. So that's their perception, perception. So the belief behind the behavior, there's four misbehaviors that we look at too. And Rudolf Dreikurs found it was either undue attention was a big one. And that's like kind of that younger kid, undue attention. I'm going to keep you busy with me. Misguided power. Those are the power struggles, misguided power. Revenge is another cycle, and assumed inadequacy. So all behavior can kind of fit into these 4 boxes. And then within those 4 different things, we look at, and the parent's able to discover which one it is by how they're feeling. And that was actually one of the first things that I needed to change when I learned all these tools in positive discipline. And you were talking about, well, when you were parented, this is how, and I never really connected to my feelings as a kid or even a young adult. Like, I think that's been my learning curve, is going in deep and trusting myself, finding what my intuition is, but also that our feelings really tell us a lot about what's happening in the outside world. So when we feel a certain way, we can figure out the child's misbehavior. That being said, the child, you're telling the child to get their shoes on, they're not listening. But another thing that I talk to parents about too, it's like, did you walk over to that child and gently maybe put your hand on their shoulder and interrupt them? Like, excuse me, Johnny. Or did you yell across the room and completely like disrupt what they were doing? Like, maybe they were concentrating on something. So I think this treating the child first with dignity and respect, maybe going over to them, like they're in this like zone and this, they're what we should be doing. They're so present to life. They're like living in the moment. So maybe you next time go over to them. Another thing is maybe we're telling the child what to do and not asking. So when a child's about the age of 4 and above, you can start using curiosity questions or motivational questions. So instead of go get your shoes on, you say, hey, what do we need on our feet so we're not going to be cold outside? It sounds random, but it makes the child think. and we want to create a problem solver. We want to create an independent child. We want to create a responsible child. So we're trying to find all these little moments to help them to build their self-esteem, self-confidence, resilience, all these skills that we want them to have at age 25. But the bottom line is they need to practice this with us. And it's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard. And I'm thinking of parents out there, and, you know, if you have 3 kids and you're trying to get them out the door in the morning for school, and maybe you're trying to get out of the door for work as well, right? This is a really busy, really stressful time. And it's really hard for a parent. There's a lot of yelling that goes across, like, we gotta go, you know, everybody get your backpacks, everybody grab your lunch, like all this stuff. So, I mean, how are parents expected to fit this into their life? Or does it just become, like with practice, more routine?
Yeah, it becomes a way of life.
Okay.
It really becomes a way of life. You know, it takes practice. It does take time. I remember one of the moms, I did a workshop, and it was a 6-week workshop with a group of moms locally. And at first she goes, at first it felt like a foreign language. And she goes, and even my husband was like, why do you sound like Kristen right now? You know, like she was trying on this different language I was teaching her.
Yeah.
And she goes, at first it felt funny. And then I saw that it worked with the kids. Right. And she goes, and then I felt better, and I wasn't feeling like the mommy monster. So I started practicing it more. And, you know, and I teach a few tools at a time, and then we practice it. And it's not going to be, I was overwhelmed at first because I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. How do I do it all? You don't need to do it all. You just work on one thing at a time. It's gradual. I always make mistakes too. And, you know, like and then you have to recover, which is another great life skill. Yeah. Hey, sweetie, I just wanted to come up to let you know I yelled at you before. And I'm sorry, I was actually thinking of my work. I needed to get a deadline done and I missed it. And I was stressed and I took it out on you. I'm really sorry. Like, imagine if we can have those conversations, what they take from it, and then they can have those conversations with their friends and family members.
Yeah. And I still struggle with these. I still struggle with all of this. And as much as I, you know, did things very differently from my parents and continue to do that because I felt that in my gut there, I still run up against these, I don't know what to call them, resistance or questions that I have because, you know, in this example that we're drawing out, you know, now you yelled at your child, you go back and you apologize to them, which is like making amends, which I think is super powerful in parenting. And I agree with everything that you said about, you know, being able to have those conversations. And so then they can have those same conversations with their children. But where does their responsibility come in where they say, you know, it's not just, you know, mom yelled, but mom yelled because you were not doing what you were supposed to, or listening or helping this situation. So we both have a part in what happened. And how do you help them to see that? Is there a part of the conversation that addresses their behavior as well?
I would say definitely yes, because we're teaching, but making sure that they're in the right headspace to hear it. So making sure it is a time after connection, you know, like, you know, maybe later on that day when they're relaxed and going to bed and you're like, hey, I just want to talk with you about something. Remember what, you know, or maybe some patterns. When it's a pattern, sometimes we talk too much. So it's like, save these moments for like the big things. But yeah, like, I think that's when you have to say, all right, we got to come up with a new plan here because something's not working. And maybe it is around screen time, because like that's the problem that we're coming up with right now is we let things, I think, get a little too loosey goosey with like screen time, and we need to pull it back a little bit. So we have to have a bit of a family meeting. But maybe before that family meeting, I'm going to have one-on-one conversations with all the kids of like, you know what, it's not working. What is happening right now? So we're going to come up with a plan. What ideas do you have? Especially with the older child, that's a great question too. Like, and that's where it is becoming a little bit more democratic of like, what ideas do you have? Yeah. You can hear them out and then you can still make your own decision. And I think it's important that parents are still like, because we're the parent, and sometimes
Right.
we're still going to have that because we're the parent, and that's why. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll say, because I have a fully functioning brain and you just don't yet. Okay. I'm helping you.
I'm definitely pulling that out in my parenting skills.
And you know what? It is what it is. Because sometimes my kids do that. They like hit me there again and again. And I'm like, because I love you. And sometimes it's just like, that's because I love you so much.
Yeah.
And it's again, and that's the thing with the screen time I'm saying. I'm like, because you don't realize that your brain is addicted to it. And I do, because I've read all these research,
Right.
So sometimes it is still like, because I'm the parent and I said so.
Right. But giving them rationale behind it, which I think is huge, and I've done the same thing. I mean, my term is always like, because I can see the big picture and you can't. Like, I'm like, you just are not capable yet of seeing the big picture, but I can see the drone view. You're still on the ground. You're going to get up to be, you're going to have drone view one day, but you don't have it right now. And so, and they hate that. Oh gosh, do they hate that response?
So
but
it's gonna take a long time too. I was talking with a colleague who has adult children, and she said, Kristen, I just had this conversation the other day with my 31-year-old.
Right.
And he was like, Mom, I see it now. You're a really good person. And you just were dealing with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so he didn't, it was at 31 that she was like, okay, thank you. Thank you for realizing that I am a good person. And I just was dealing with stuff. And that's what we're all dealing with stuff, but we're good people. And that's why I actually do love, Dr. Becky's work, which is different than positive discipline, but so similar in many ways. Her idea of they're good inside. Like when we can go with that intention, we're good inside and they're good inside. And like you said before, like they're not trying to piss us off. They're not like doing these things because like they're asking for our help usually. And that's where this that mistaken goal chart that I talked about before with the belief behind the behavior, when we can see their coded message is just like, help me to belong, like show me that you care, show me, like when you see that, you're like, oh my God, I love you so much, letting that message of love come through. But sometimes it's going to be with boundaries and with firmness. Sometimes it's going to be with a no.
Right.
And the answer is no. And I love you so much. And you can be upset. That's that validating their feelings.
Yeah.
Validating their feelings. And you can be upset. I get it. I was really upset when my mom didn't let me do this thing.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we do have to lay the law and just validate.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers because my next question I was going to ask you is that, I know for my husband, like I said, we still have a little bit, there are moments where we disagree on how we want to handle something. And he's definitely feels like, he's definitely more the authoritarian, these kids need to toe the line. And part of that is, I know for him, is this belief that I have to raise these kids, they have to go into the working world and they have to know how to take direction and follow orders and toe the line because they need a job and they need to be employed and they need to not, live in our house forever. So I think there's, this fear, it's fear-based, absolutely, that if I don't teach them this, that they will enter the working world and not be able to hold down a job because they have not learned these skills of basically like shutting your mouth and doing what you don't want to do. Because sometimes you have to do that when you're employed. Actually, a lot of times you have to do that when you're employed. So is that something that's common that parents talk to you about? And what is your response to that?
So I think looking at the big picture is important for that scenario of how is this going to help my child to get, and so when we do those two lists of like, these are the problems, these are our life skills and characteristics, our goals. Is the child getting any of the skills that we want through that behavior? So let me explain as well. Like if some of those life skills and characteristics that we want in the child is to be responsible, to be independent, to be successful, to do all these things in life, but to also be loving and caring and, a good human being. Is me teaching them to just shut up and do what I told you? Is it teaching any of these skills? I don't know. It might, be. So I think we have to really, in our gut, say, okay, yes, I am teaching them a skill that I want them to have. Then by all means do it. But if it's like, well, no, if I look at it that way, it's actually not teaching any of those skills. It's the opposite. They're going to go into revenge. So we have to just be a little bit concerned about what is the child thinking. Because it's not just what we say to our kids, it's what they then say to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So is the child sitting there and like, fine, I'm going to do it because dad is making me. And next time I'm going to be sneaky and not let him see me do this. And next time I'm going to do this. And he's going to, if he's making me hurt, I'm going to hurt him worse. We have to just be so careful that it doesn't slip into one of those mistaken goals of misbehavior.
Right.
So I don't know, that's my take on it, but
yeah, it's complicated is the bottom line. And I think it varies per child also. Like each child needs to be parented a little bit different based on their personality and those challenging children. So I was lucky in that sense. Neither one of my children are super strong-willed children, but I have a best friend who has very strong-willed children. I have a little niece who's only 2, who I think is shaping up to be a very strong-willed child. And those children are especially, challenging for their parents. And so how do you advise, those parents when they're just, are they asking for love? Like, where does this strong will come from? Like, what do you think is behind that behavior that a parent can look at the behavior, although it may be frustrating, and say, okay, but really actually what he or she is trying to communicate is this.
Yeah. So I have one of those strong-willed kids, and that strong-willed child made me get this positive discipline training and then continue to go on and get all these other trainings, because it's hard to control a strong-willed child. Do we want to control our children? Probably not. So I needed to learn communication skills and how to set up my environment to see it as a strength. So how can we perceive it as a strength and not that it's a weakness, but as a challenge, it's strength. So I use her as an example because now she's a strong-willed 15-year-old. And I am so grateful that she is a strong-willed 15-year-old who can handle herself and say no when she knows she needs to say no. So it's like, sometimes you don't want to control that and like stifle that down.
Right.
That being said, a 2-year-old can rule the roost, and you want to be so careful that that doesn't happen. So that's when you have to allow, with that significance, is like giving limited choice. Would you like to wear the blue pants or the red pants? Like limited choice works well with, young children. Having this routine that they help to create. Okay, this is going to be our nighttime routine. First you're going to do this and this, and you even like take pictures of them doing all the things so then they can do it independently. Sometimes strong-willed children need to have experience of using their personal power in purposeful ways. So doing work around the house and purposeful work, there's many ways to really instill like that self-confidence and strong will, because you actually do want your child to have a strong will, or maybe it's more free will. You don't want them to have free will. But even like going back to the example, like with your husband, and I have similar differences with my spouse too. Sometimes it's okay. Like I think our kids need to know that we have limits too. So I think sometimes they need to, feel like, okay, yeah, I need to be respectful. And, but as long as we are teaching them to be respectfully, like we sometimes treat the people that we love the most, the worst.
Yeah.
And we are the worst in front of the people we love the most because we're so comfortable, and they tend to be the ones that trigger us. But I was just, listening to this the other day of how these relationships, they were all universally chosen for us.
Yes.
So how can we look inward to ourselves and say, and be curious, be curious of the misbehavior, be curious of why I'm feeling this way inside.
Yeah.
Curiosity is a good tool that I use. I don't think that answered your question at all.
No, it did. It did. The one piece that I was saying is how could a parent reframe when their child's being very obstinate and acting out? How can they reframe that? And we talked a little bit about, well, they're good inside, they're not trying to be bad. But when you just have that child that is just every little thing is such a challenge.
And it's hard. And sometimes if the parent, they even have to throw their hands up and say, you know what, I can't make you.
Yeah.
I can't make you go up to bed. And I'm going to go up to bed now. When you're ready to come up, you could come up. Sometimes they just want that interaction. So if you leave the situation, they'll be like, wait a minute, no one's here to fight. This is boring. I remember during one of my Montessori trainings, we watched this great video of a tantruming, probably like a 2.5-year-old child. This tantruming just throwing the biggest tantrum. And the mom would just walk away, and she walked into like the other room, and then you saw the child like look up, followed the mom into the other room, and then started again and started tantruming again, and then the mom like would walk away, and then the child would look up. So sometimes they just want us there, and they have to get these things out.
Yeah, these emotions out. Yes. I remember my son was little. My mom, when I would work, she would come and babysit, and he was a crier. He was a crier. But he could flip it like a switch. Like he would seem like he was so distraught. But the moment you gave him what he wanted, it turned off, like literally like turning off a faucet or turning off a light, like that quickly. There was no recovery. There was no nothing. And I remember he was only like 9 months old, and she called me and she was like, he knows what he's doing. Like he's doing this on purpose. And I'm like, Ma, he is 9 months old. That's ridiculous. But then I came to I was like, oh no, she's right. Like at 9 months old, he knew what he was doing and he wanted what he wanted. And so he was going to behave in a way that he knew was going to get the response that he wanted. And it's insane to me. It's wild to me that at such a young age, children know these things. And so then learning how to respond to that, because, there's also that piece that like, I can't always give you what you want exactly when you want it. There's a part of life that does require patience. And sometimes it just is not possible, but learning, learning how to respond, even though when you know that your child, like this child, she's tantruming, and then her mom walks away and she stops and she moves to the, what do they want? They want attention, right? I mean, they love you, you're their parent.
And we do teach emotional regulation too, because that's a big piece of it. But it's first, we have to teach the parent how to regulate their emotions first. And sometimes it's through the same things that maybe we would have in that morning routine of like, taking that deep breath, getting a drink of water, like just, it's the thought ladder too, of like, okay, my thoughts are spinning out of control and I'm parenting out of fear. Like, what is that thought? And you're like, the thought is like, well, they're going to grow up and never get a job and never be able to, it's like,
right.
A little spiraled out of control. Like, we just have to be aware of the thought that is making us feel like, well, I'm just not going to let them, like,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think becoming aware of the thought that is driving our reaction to them is huge. It's absolutely huge. And there's always a story that's going on behind your reaction. So actually looking at the story and asking yourself, is that true? Which is a very famous way of treating anxiety as well. When people go into CBT therapy and all that for anxiety, anxiety has a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories going on in the brain. And so it's getting a little space from the story, and then from a space of calmness, asking, is that really true?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion for parents. I love that. Well, anything else? We're coming to the end of our time here. Anything else that you would like to share?
There's so much to share. So I happily invite anybody to, follow along. I have Instagram, Kristen Ancker Coaching, and a free Facebook group, the Parent Empowerment Group, that go live, and group of like-minded parents where we're all just trying our best, and trying the best with what we know. Another thing I always love to say, it's only 3 out of 10 times. 3 out of 10 times we have to try to be this positive, disciplined parent, just having the intention. But please, please, please don't ever beat yourself up or have any guilt over anything we do. Because I really think it's really important that our children just see us as this, love, light, and this role model of how they can.
I love that. I actually just interviewed a therapist, and she said for secure attachment, we only need to respond, I guess, positively or in the right way to our children 50% of the time for secure attachment. I was like, that's genius. That's fantastic.
50%. I'm even saying 3 out of 10 times. We're all just like, you know what? Give ourselves a lot of slack.
A lot of slack.
Just don't lock them in the closet. You can lock yourself in the bathroom. That's the technique. I use the bathroom technique. Just go into the bathroom, lock the door, take 10 deep breaths, and you're a new person when you wake up, when you get out of there.
The most challenging part of parenting ever was for me, and I've had a lot of challenges in parenting, was when we had a puppy and I was homeschooling, and I'm a nurse and working with COVID patients and all that, but really honestly it was homeschooling a kindergartner, and I remember being like, mommy needs to go upstairs.
Yes.
like maybe once an hour I had to go upstairs and do a mini meditation before I could come back down.
Oh, you and I have the same age. We had a kindergartner in COVID. Yep.
It was not pretty. So don't feel that. I feel like you can't feel guilty about that. You can't feel guilty about feeling like you need that time.
Yes. And we do. We need that time. So it's really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I'll put all those things that we mentioned about, how to find you in the show notes, so that if people, are looking for, for your services, then they can find you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. On my website, KristenAncker.com, I go into schools and do a lot of workshops too. So if you would like me to come to your child's school, I come live and on Zoom. So they're really fun, interactive workshops. So you walk away with just a few tools that you can handle.
Yeah. And do you come live just locally, or do you actually go
I travel and so both.
Okay. All right, great. Then I'll put all that in there and people can reach out.
All right, great. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.